So our first story is going to be The Private Eyes and the Case of the Big Stink. And this is a very strange title. The Private Eyes? We'll have to read, and we want to pay close attention because we want to find out why our author, Wendy Silvano, titled this story The Private Eyes and the Case of the Big Stink. And we do get a picture here. So we get a picture of a girl holding up a pair of shoes, it looks like. And it looks like we might have three characters, but we don't want to make assumptions off of a picture. Sometimes test makers will put a really random picture that actually doesn't have much to do with the story. So we'll read and find out. Inez brushed some brown hairs from her bedspread. Ivy fluffed up the pink pillow on her bed. Then she picked up the green pillow. Eck, said Ivy. This pillow smells. Inez took a whiff. You're right. Izzy came into the bedroom. Hey, she said. Who rolled my slippers in garbage? Ivy and Inez laughed. I'm not joking, said Izzy. Smell them. Ivy smelled the slippers. Yuck, that smells just like my pillow. What's going on, said Inez. Something smelly is going on, said Izzy. But what would make my pillow and your slippers stink, said Ivy. This must be a case for the private eyes, said Izzy. Oh, get my notebook, said Inez. She wrote, The Case of the Big Stink. Any ideas, she asked? Let's see if anything else smells the same, said Ivy. Great idea, said Izzy. Inez wrote, Plan 1, sniff out the stink. The private eyes went to the kitchen. They sniffed the counter, they sniffed the table, they sniffed the garbage can. The garbage can stinks, said Ivy, but not in the way my pillow does. Let's try the living room, said Izzy. Oops, I lost my place. Okay. They sniffed the curtains, they sniffed the lamps, they sniffed the sofa. Yuck, said Ivy. That's the stink, all right. Inez wrote, The sofa has the big stink. What do Ivy's pillows, my slippers, and the sofa have in common, said Izzy. They all stink, said Ivy. Ha ha, said Izzy. Wait a minute, said Inez. All of those things are soft and cushy. That's an important clue, said Izzy. Inez wrote, Everything with the big stink is soft and cushy. My pillow is the cushiest, said Ivy. That's why I like to lie on it. Said Izzy. The pillow and the sofa are things people lie on. What about the slippers, said Inez. People don't lie on slippers. But Baxter does, said Ivy. He sleeps on anything soft. And look, brown hairs on my slippers, said Izzy. I suspect Baxter rolled in something stinky. How can we check, said Inez. He's gone with Mom. Let's smell his bed, said Ivy. Brilliant, said Izzy. They all went to sniff Baxter's bed. Yuck, Inez wrote. Baxter is spreading the big stink. But what is he rolling in, said Izzy. Let's follow the smell, said Ivy. Great idea, said Izzy. So Izzy, Inez, and Ivy went outside. They walked around the yard sniffing. Check out the areas behind these bushes, said Izzy. That's Baxter's favorite napping spot, said Inez. The ground there is covered with soft moss. She took a whiff. It's got the stink, all right. Ivy peeked under the bushes. There are 2 rotting eggs under here. They must be leftovers from the Easter egg hunt. They're all crushed from Baxter rolling in them. Just then, Mom came home with Baxter. Someone has got to give this dog a bath, said Mom. He stinks. Izzy, Inez, and Ivy laughed. Come on, Baxter, said Izzy. Let's get you unstinked. Inez wrote, The Case of the Big Stink solved. All right, now, if we go back into our story here, we might be able to figure out why it's called The Private Eyes. We know that our 3 main characters, all 3 of their names start with the letter I. And if you ever heard of somebody who called themselves a private investigator, So private eye, somebody might see it and think it stands for a private investigator. So investigator would be like somebody who's kind of different from a police detective. They're a private eye because they usually have their own business. So like if somebody had a crime they wanted to solve, but maybe it wasn't like a real crime. Maybe it was just like something that happened to them and they wanted to figure it out, but it wasn't necessarily a crime. They might call a private eye to figure something out. So we could say this is a play on words because all three characters have the first name that starts with I, but they're not really private eyes because they're just kids, right? So they're pretending to be investigators, to investigate their stink. And the other things we would want to start to look at. So when our story starts, we have Enos, Ivy, and then we got Izzy. So those are our three main characters. We could say that all three characters are our main characters. Sometimes we want to pick one character to be the main character, but for this one, we can say they're all three because they're solving this mystery together. And then you would also want to identify their setting. So when we talk about setting, right? Setting is the time and place the story is set, or the time and place the story is taking place, or the time and place of the story. So for a story like this, we could probably say that this story could really be taking place at like any time. So we could almost say the story's present day because there's not any like futuristic technology they're using. They just have a regular notebook. So we could say the story is set in the present day and is taking place in a family home. We could say that the family home is where our story is taking place. It could be somewhere in America or somewhere in any country, really. Anywhere where people have dogs as pets, because lots of people have dogs as pets. So that would be our setting. And then the next thing we would want to identify would be the problem. So the problem, we can either call that the conflict or the problem. So we could say conflict, problem. The characters notice there is something smelly in their house and they will investigate what it is. We could say the source of the smell. So now, this very beginning of our story, we would call this our exposition. We learn our characters and we get the hint of their conflict. So this would be our story's exposition. And then once they start investigating, we would call that the story's rising action. And that would lead us to our climax. So with this story, it's not the most adventurous story, right? It's more of like a mystery story. So the climax of a mystery story is typically going to be when they finally solve the mystery. So we could say right around, we could say they suspect it's Baxter. So Baxter's their dog, right? We could say the climax of the story, or point of no return, is when they finally figure out that the smell is these Easter eggs that they had left out. When they peek under the bushes and they finally discover they had left some Easter eggs out, which those would be like hard-boiled eggs. Hard-boiled eggs definitely get smelly if they're left unattended for a really long time. So this would be our climax of the story. When the girls finally solve their conflict, they figure out exactly what was making Baxter smell. And then the ending of our story is, you could say, the falling action would be when the mother comes home with the dog. And then they say they're going to give the dog a bath. And the resolution, that could just be, the resolution is typically going to be the very shortest part of the story. So we could say the resolution is simply they take Baxter and they bring him inside and the case is closed. So that would be a reading and some notes for the case of the big stink. And then in the next one, we'll look over our questions.